Think back to the summer of 1977. In New York City, the air wasn't just hot, it was heavy. It was a physical weight that sat on your chest. The city was in the grip of a brutal heat wave, with temperatures hovering in the 90s and humidity so thick you could practically swim through it. But the heat was just the backdrop. The real atmosphere in the city was one of fear and exhaustion. The economy was in shambles. The city was effectively bankrupt. A serial killer known as the Son of Sam was stalking the streets, shooting couples in parked cars, making every shadow feel dangerous. New Yorkers were already on edge, looking over their shoulders, wiping sweat from their brows, waiting for something to break. On the evening of July 13th, something finally did. But it wasn't the heat, and it wasn't the tension. It was the sky itself. Around 8:30 p.m., a thunderstorm front moved down from Westchester County. It was violent and erratic.
Lightning streaked across the Hudson River, and in a control room in upstate New York, dials began to twitch. Within 60 minutes, the unthinkable would happen. A chain reaction of impossible bad luck and human error would sever the jugular vein of the greatest city on earth. Elevators would stop between floors. Subways would coast to a halt in pitch-black tunnels, and 9 million people would be plunged into a darkness that would strip away the veneer of civilization. This wasn't just a power outage. It was the spark that ignited a powder keg of social unrest, resulting in the most chaotic 25 hours in the history of New York. This is the story of the Blackout of 1977, and for those who lived through it, the city was never the same again. Subscribe to the channel right now and hit the bell icon. We are working hard to bring you the most in-depth documentaries on the internet, and your support helps us uncover these lost stories. Thank you.
The morning of July 13th started with that oppressive, suffocating heat, the kind of heat that makes the asphalt soft under your shoes. In Queens, a Mets fan we'll call Eddie was getting ready to head to Shea Stadium. The Mets were playing the Chicago Cubs that night. It wasn't a great season, but for Eddie and thousands of others, the ballpark was an escape. It was a place to drink a cold beer, forget about the headlines, forget about the serial killer on the loose, and just watch baseball. In a control center on West End Avenue, the system operators for Consolidated Edison, Con Ed, were watching their own game. They were monitoring the flow of electricity into the massive, hungry grid of New York City. The city consumes power like a beast. Air conditioners were rattling in a million windows, refrigerators were humming in every bodega, and the neon lights of Times Square were beginning to flicker on as the sun went down.
The demand was high, dangerously high, but manageable. Or so they thought. The operators had no idea that a storm cell was aligning perfectly with their most critical transmission lines north of the city. At 9:34 p.m., the first bolt of lightning struck. It didn't hit a building. It hit a substation at Buchanan South on the Hudson River. It tripped 2 circuit breakers. Now, in a perfect world, the system handles this. It reroutes the power. It compensates. But the lightning didn't stop. A second bolt hit a transmission line just minutes later. Then a third. It was a celestial assault on the infrastructure. At the Con Ed Control Center, alarms began to scream. The men in the room, experienced engineers who had spent their lives managing the grid, stared at their consoles in disbelief. The system wasn't just struggling, it was shedding load faster than they could comprehend.
They had minutes, seconds really, to make decisions that would usually take hours of planning. They tried to shed load, which is a polite way of saying they tried to intentionally black out specific neighborhoods to save the rest of the system. But the commands they sent weren't fast enough. The power coming from New England was cut. The power from New Jersey tried to compensate, surged, and failed. At 9:36 p.m., the giant generator in Queens known as Big Alice tripped offline. That was the death knell. At Shea Stadium, Eddie was watching the bottom of the 6th inning. The Mets were losing, naturally. Suddenly, the lights on the scoreboard blinked. Then the floodlights, those massive banks of artificial daylight, simply died. For a second, there was silence. Then 20,000 people realized they were sitting in the dark. The players on the field were just shadows. The organist, in a moment of brilliant improvisation, started playing Jingle Bells.
The crowd laughed. They thought it was a momentary glitch. They didn't know that miles away, in the heart of Manhattan, the Chrysler Building had just vanished into the night. The darkness rolled south like a tidal wave. It hit the Bronx. It swallowed Harlem. It extinguished the lights of the Empire State Building. Within minutes, the entire skyline of New York City, the most recognizable silhouette in the world, was gone. The only light came from the headlights of cars and the glow of the moon. Now, you have to understand the difference between 1977 and the previous major blackout in 1965. In 1965, the blackout was seen as a romantic adventure. People helped each other. They directed traffic. It was peaceful. But 1977 was a different era. The social contract in New York had frayed. Inflation was destroying savings. Unemployment in some neighborhoods was astronomical. The city was broke, dirty, and angry.
When the lights went out this time, the mood didn't turn to romance. It turned to opportunity. In the Bushwick section of Brooklyn, a store owner we'll call Maria was closing up her small electronics shop. She heard the hum of the streetlights die. Then, silence. But the silence didn't last. Within 10 minutes, she heard the sound that would define the night of July 13th. The sound of shattering glass. It started slowly. A trash can thrown through a window. A gate being pried open with a crowbar. But it spread like a contagion. In 1965, people looked out their windows to see if the neighbors were okay. In 1977, thousands of people looked out their windows, saw the darkness, and ran into the streets. They weren't running for safety. They were running to take what they could never afford. On Broadway in Brooklyn, the chaos began. Gates were ripped off storefronts using chains attached to cars.
People swarmed into appliance stores, furniture shops, clothing boutiques, and supermarkets. It wasn't just theft. It was a frenzy. They called it Christmas in July. Maria watched from her second-floor apartment as her shop below was torn apart. She saw neighbors she recognized, people she said hello to every morning, walking out with her televisions, her radios, her livelihood. She called the police, but the line was dead or busy. It didn't matter. There were no police coming. This is a crucial part of the story that often gets glossed over. The NYPD was arguably the biggest police force in the country, but that night they were hopelessly outnumbered. The police radio channels were a cacophony of panicked voices. 1013, officer needs assistance. Looting in progress. Shots fired. The police commanders made a tactical decision that haunts the department to this day. They issued a containment order. They realized they couldn't stop the looting.
If they tried to arrest everyone, they would be overrun. If they fired their weapons, it would be a massacre. So, in many precincts, the order was simply to stand back, hold the perimeter, protect the hospitals and the fire stations, let the stores go. Imagine being a cop on the beat in the Bronx that night. You're standing on a corner, flashlight in hand, and you see 300 people tearing apart a Pontiac dealership. They are driving brand new cars right through the showroom windows, glass flying everywhere, and you can do nothing. You are watching the total breakdown of law and order. In the upscale neighborhoods, the experience was different, but equally surreal. In Greenwich Village, restaurants moved tables onto the sidewalks. People drank wine by candlelight, laughing, treating it like a block party. But just a few miles north, the sky was beginning to glow orange. The arsonists had come out. It wasn't enough to steal. Some wanted to burn.
In Brooklyn and the Bronx, over 1,000 fires were set that night. Firefighters were dodging bricks and bottles thrown from rooftops as they tried to hook up hoses to hydrants that had no pressure. The city was literally burning, and the smoke drifted through the streets, mixing with the humidity to create a choking, apocalyptic fog. Let's go back to the technical side for a moment, because the failure of the grid is a fascinating subtopic of its own. Inside the control centers, the engineers were fighting a losing battle to bring the power back. You can't just flip a switch to restart New York. It's a delicate ballet. You have to bring power back slowly, neighborhood by neighborhood. If you rush it, the surge will blow the system again. They were trying to use power from Long Island to jumpstart the generators in Queens. It failed. They tried to bring power down from the north. It failed. For hours, the engineers were flying blind.
They were communicating via backup radios and telephone lines that were jammed. The technology of 1977 wasn't digital, it was analog. It was physical switches and dials. And that night, the machine was broken. It took them until the next morning to even stabilize the frequency enough to attempt a restoration. Meanwhile, underground, the situation was terrifying. The subways run on electricity. When the third rail died, trains coasted to a stop in the tunnels. Thousands of passengers were zapped in the dark, miles from a station, in 95-degree heat. There was no ventilation. The air became stale and hot. Conductors had to walk the tracks with flashlights, leading lines of terrified commuters along the narrow catwalks, stepping over rats and garbage, guiding them toward the faint light of the emergency exits. In the chaos, strange micro-societies formed. In the upper-class high-rises of Manhattan, doormen stood guard with baseball bats.
Neighbors who had lived next to each other for years without speaking shared melting ice cream and warm beer in the hallways. But on the streets of Bushwick, the vibe was predatory. There's a story about a DJ in the Bronx, a young kid who loved music but couldn't afford the equipment. His name was Curtis. That night, Curtis watched as an audio store was breached. He didn't take a TV. He didn't take a toaster. He ran in and grabbed a mixer. He grabbed 2 turntables. He grabbed a microphone. This brings us to one of the most fascinating cultural ripples of the Blackout. Hip-hop historians often point to the Blackout of 1977 as a catalyst for the genre. Before that night, there were only a handful of DJ crews in the Bronx with real sound systems. The equipment was too expensive. But the day after the Blackout, suddenly there were 1,000 new DJs. Every block had a sound system.
The explosion of creativity that followed, the battles, the block parties, the rapid evolution of rap music, was fueled, in part, by the inventory of those looted electronics stores. It's a strange irony. A night of destruction helped build a culture that would take over the world. As the sun began to rise on July 14th, the full scale of the devastation became visible. It looked like a war zone. Broadway in Brooklyn was covered in a layer of debris so thick you couldn't see the pavement. Mannequins lay in the gutters like bodies. Cars were overturned and burned out. The gates of thousands of businesses were twisted metal pretzels. The police had arrested 3,776 people. It was the largest mass arrest in the city's history. The jails were so full they had to reopen the condemned sections of the Tombs, a notorious prison, just to hold the overflow. The prisoners were crammed into cells, sweating, shouting, banging on the bars. It was a pressure cooker inside the legal system.
Mayor Abraham Beame held a press conference. He looked tired. He looked defeated. He blamed Con Ed, calling it gross negligence. He tried to deflect the anger, but the city knew. The Blackout hadn't caused the rot in New York. It had just exposed it. It stripped away the darkness that usually hid the poverty and the rage, and it put it all on display under the harsh light of a July morning. Before we continue to the aftermath, I want to take a moment to ask you to like this video. It helps the algorithm share this history with more people. If you're enjoying this deep dive, let us know in the comments. Do you remember where you were during a blackout? The power didn't come back all at once. It trickled back. At 7 a.m., parts of Queens flickered to life, then Staten Island. Wall Street didn't get power until later that morning, meaning the financial heart of the world lost half a day of trading.
It wasn't until 10:39 p.m. on July 14th, a full 25 hours after the lightning struck, that the entire city was reconnected. But the lights coming back on didn't fix what had broken. The psychological damage was done. The shopkeeper, Maria, returned to her store to find nothing left. The shelves were bare. The cash register was smashed on the floor. She, like hundreds of other small business owners, never reopened. They took the insurance money if they had it, and they left. They moved to the suburbs, to New Jersey, to Long Island. The blackout accelerated the white flight and the middle-class exodus that was already draining the city. The political fallout was immediate. Mayor Beame lost the primary election later that year. He was replaced by Ed Koch, a man who campaigned on restoring order, on being tough on crime. The chaos of the blackout paved the way for a new era of New York politics, one that was harder, stricter, and less tolerant of disorder. And what about Con Ed?
The investigations that followed were brutal. They found that the system was antiquated. They found that the operators had hesitated. But they also found that the lightning strikes were a freak event,
a 1-in-a-million shot. Still, the grid was completely redesigned. New safeguards were installed. The system that manages the power flow today is light years ahead of what they had in 1977, largely because of the lessons learned that night. But for the people, the memory of the blackout isn't about circuit breakers or lightning. It's about the darkness. There's a profound difference between the dark of the countryside and the dark of a megacity. In the country, darkness is natural. In the city, darkness feels like a failure. It feels like the machine has stopped. For those 25 hours, New Yorkers were reminded of how fragile their existence really was. We build skyscrapers, we dig tunnels, we electrify the night. But one storm, one switch, one failure, and we are back in the wild.
Eddie, the Mets fan at Shea Stadium, he eventually got home. He walked for hours, hitchhiked part of the way with a guy who had a flashlight taped to his car hood. He told his kids about that night for the rest of his life. He talked about the singing in the stadium, the fear on the streets, and the strange quiet beauty of seeing the stars above Queens without the light pollution to drown them out. And the young DJ, Curtis, he became a legend in his neighborhood. The equipment he liberated that night launched a career. He wasn't alone. Grandmaster Caz, a hip-hop pioneer, famously said that he went into the blackout with nothing and came out with a mixing board. It's a controversial legacy, creation born from theft, but it is an undeniable part of the city's history. The blackout of 1977 was a mirror. It showed New York exactly what it was at that moment: broken, dangerous, divided, but also resilient. It was the rock-bottom moment for the city.
After 1977, there was nowhere to go but up. It took decades. It took the boom of the 80s, the cleanup of the 90s, to get the city back on its feet. But if you want to understand modern New York, you have to look at it through the lens of that dark July night. Today, when you walk through Bushwick, you see trendy cafes and art galleries. You see a neighborhood reborn. But if you look closely at the older buildings, you can still see the scars. You can see the faint outline of where old signs used to be, signs for businesses that vanished on July 14th and never came back. You can talk to the old-timers sitting on the stoops, the ones who were teenagers in '77. Ask them about the night the lights went out. They won't talk about the heat. They won't talk about the lightning. They will tell you about the sound, the roar of the city when the rules disappeared. They will tell you about the fear of the Son of Sam in the shadows.
And they will tell you about the morning after, walking through streets that looked like a hurricane had passed, realizing that the storm wasn't wind and rain, it was us. The blackout of '77 taught a generation of Americans that civilization is a thin veneer. It relies on trust, on law, and yes, on electricity. When you take the power away, you find out who people really are. Some become helpers, directing traffic with flashlights. Some become opportunists, smashing windows. Most just wait, hoping the light returns. It has been nearly 50 years since the Great Blackout. The grid is smarter now. The police are better equipped. The city is richer. But every summer, when the heat rises and the air conditioners hum in unison and the sky turns that bruised purple color before a storm, New Yorkers pause. They look at the lights flickering in their apartments, and for a split second, they remember. They remember that we are all just one lightning strike away from the dark.
If you enjoyed this journey into history, please subscribe to our channel. We have documentaries coming up on the blizzards of the 90s and the Great San Francisco earthquake, and you don't want to miss them. Click the video on your screen now to keep watching. Thank you for your time, and stay safe out there.